Tonight, warfare or welfare, the government's multi-billion-pound defence dilemma. Sky News understands that NATO will pile on the pressure for the UK to make big increases in defence spending in an attempt to keep the US and Trump on board. With a potential price tag of 20 to 30 billion pounds, what are the consequences if Keir Starmer fails to deliver? We'll ask Lord Robertson, a former head of NATO and lead author of yesterday's Defence Review. Also tonight, the government blames nice weather for high levels of migrant crossings. We have exclusive data that shows crossings are up even when the weather is bad. The government threatens to sue the former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich in a multi-billion-pound dispute over the sale of the club. Thames Water is dealt a fresh blow after a private equity company pulled out of a rescue plan, but was negative rhetoric from the government partly to blame. And new polling shows the most popular members of the cabinet. We'll see who's heading for the Champions League and who's facing relegation. No popularity contest here on the Politics Hub, so our duo Joe Grady and Sarah Pochin have nothing to worry about for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. I wonder if the Chancellor is a Star Trek fan. Now, I'm not really, to be honest. But my team were telling me today that in the film, there's a scenario that all wannabe officers have to face. It's called the Kobayashi Maru. So it puts the cadet in a situation where there's no way to win. But the point of it is to see how the person reacts to an impossible situation, what they choose to sacrifice, even when the battle is sure to be lost. Which made me think of defence spending. And today, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, has broken a story that NATO is urging the UK to increase military spending to 3.5% of our GDP. Now, the PM has made no firm commitments after the Defence Review yesterday, but this latest development will just give Rachel Reeves a new headache. So the IFS has told us it could mean 20 or 30 billion pounds in tax rises, or even more cuts to government spending. Why tax rises and why cuts? Why not borrowing? Well, because of this.
We will continue to meet the fiscal rules that I set out in the budget next year. Economic stability is non-negotiable. The fiscal rules that I set out in my budget in October are non-negotiable. Our fiscal rules were non-negotiable. I said it at the election, I said it at the budget, and I say it again today.
Non-negotiable, got that. The fiscal rules are the self-made handcuffs that stop the Chancellor from being able to please everyone. But across Europe, leaders are finding new ways to spend more on the military. Even Germany, once a champion of fiscal prudence, is now preparing to borrow to spend billions more on defence.
Und stehen Mittel zur Verfügung?
We have funds available that can be financed through new debt. Let me be frank about this. We must be extremely careful with these options because these debts trigger interest payments and they also have to be repaid one day. They can therefore only be justified if we use this money to permanently and sustainably increase the value of our infrastructure and improve the overall performance of our country. Then it can be justified, but only then.
Now, in Star Trek, Captain Kirk was the only person to ever win the Kobayashi Maru scenario. And he did it by reprogramming the computer and changing the rules. Could that be a lesson for Rachel Reeves? Well, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, joins us now with more details on the story that she broke. So, Deborah, in 24 hours, it's gone from 3% to 3.5%. What's going on?
Well, it has, and this is not something that's just happened overnight. NATO has been pressuring the UK for a long time, all allies, not just the UK. Mark Rutte has made very clear for months now that he sees north of 3% as an absolute minimum that all of the member states in Europe need to meet, not just to deal with the threat that they see posed by countries, in particular Russia, but also the need to respond to Donald Trump. He's made very clear that America is turning away from Europe and towards the Indo-Pacific region to focus on the threat that they see posed by China. And he wants European allies to step up and do much, much more to defend themselves. And that, of course, requires funding. The British position has been really interesting, though. I've been trying to get to the bottom of this for weeks now. A couple of weeks ago, I heard that we were going to have to shift our spending pledge to 3.5%. Why? Because we have made NATO, being a leading member of NATO, a key plank of our defence policy. And you saw yesterday with the publication of the Strategic Defence Review, all the way through that, it's all about NATO first. And sources were saying to me, how can the UK possibly say that we are NATO first when we are actually NATO last when it comes to stepping in line with what Mark Rutte is wanting for in this defence spending pledge? It's being called the Hague Investment Plan because this summit of allies will be taking place later in the month. And what Mark Rutte wants is around 3.5% of GDP for each European ally and Canada to be spent on hard military power, and then another 1.5% of GDP to be spent on defence-related things. And he hasn't really defined that yet, and a firm definition hasn't been drawn up. But it's believed to involve things like infrastructure, new roads, better railways, more airports, things that actually perhaps the Chancellor could get behind. But they are also things that would be crucial in a crisis to mobilise the military. And that's why it's important. And I have been told it's not just that NATO is urging the UK to do this, it's that the UK Whitehall officials across Whitehall, I've been told, believe that this will happen. It's inconceivable, I've been told, that Sir Keir Starmer won't make that change, make that pledge and make it clear at the summit. The big question for people I've spoken to inside the Ministry of Defence is, why has there been this sort of the government tying themselves in knots over that 3% earlier pledge, not being able to say whether it was going to be an ambition or a commitment when actually it's going to have to change?
Fascinating stuff. Deborah Haynes there, our defence and security editor, really making an awful lot of the running on this story. Well, let's now get, shall we, more on the political dilemma that is all causing this trouble for the government. Here's Tamara Cohen.
Celebrating liftoff for the Defence Review, including a new generation of combat aircraft. But there are already warnings the pace of spending will have to increase, with the UK under pressure to agree a rise to 3.5% at a NATO summit this month. The Defence Secretary said Britain was already playing its part.
As the Prime Minister has said, Britain already makes a huge contribution to NATO. We've published a defence review that has NATO at its heart. This is the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. The important thing is how we spend it. And here today we've seen how we can use the innovation to give us the battlefield edge.
Sky News understands that in the building behind me, 3% spending, which is still years away, is seen as a bare minimum. One senior defence source said the UK would have to go higher, or we can no longer call ourselves a leader within NATO. The chair of the Defence Committee said the Trump administration was driving allies to do more and urgently. NATO are already pushing for a 3.5% at least. Do you think the Prime Minister will have to commit to it?
The inexorable push towards it is inevitable, I fear, in that if that is what the US has decided, we do need to realise the gravity of the moment, realise that Russia has transitioned into a war-fighting economy, realise that China and others are also spending huge amounts on defence. We certainly cannot be complacent.
How much will taxes have to go up to pay for defence?
But this is a key question, as the government already faces a backlash over welfare cuts and has promised to increase spending on public services. Inevitably, this means spending cuts or tax rises. How much would the government need to raise?
Getting to 3.5% of national income, obviously relative to today, is even more expensive. It's something like an extra £30 billion a year. We could get away with not having tax increases if the economy starts growing much, much faster than it has over the last 15 years. But if it doesn't, and if the government can't think of other bits of what it's doing that it can stop or really significantly cut, then inevitably we'll have tax rises.
The projects to rearm Britain will take years to complete, but the wrangling over the price tag starts now. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Now, a little earlier, I spoke to Lord Robertson, former Cabinet Minister, former head of NATO and the lead author of the government's Strategic Defence Review. Thank you very much for being on the programme. It really feels like you were the perfect person to speak to today because you've got the political experience, you were Defence Secretary under Blair, you're a former Secretary-General at NATO, and of course you wrote what has been described as the most radical blueprint for the military for a generation as well. My first question is about this report today that NATO wants the UK to spend 3.5% of GDP on defence within 10 years, obviously more than what the government has been talking about. Should we meet that requirement?
Well, that's an aspiration. And I was into aspirations when I was Secretary-General as well. When I went to NATO, I said I had three priorities. One was capabilities, two was capabilities, three was capabilities, because that's what NATO is about. So, so Secretary-General Rutte is saying we should ideally be spending 3.5%. Half the countries don't even spend the 2%, which was laid down at the Wales summit 11 years ago. So, the idea of 3.5%, I think, is a little bit beyond what people are capable of doing. And in any event, we should be focusing on what the money is being spent on rather than on the quantity of money itself. It's capabilities, readiness and equipment, and these are the things that Secretary-General Stoltenberg said were better measures than simply GNP. So I think 3.5%, I think is beyond Italy, Spain, Portugal, who are all under 2% at the present moment. Canada, which is on 1.1%.
So it's unrealistic,
it's got to be,
that's what you're saying.
There's a degree of unrealism about it which encourages people, to fake the figures. But I think that the main priority is that NATO and SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, has the capabilities in order to be able to deter any aggressor.
So in other words, Keir Starmer shouldn't even bother trying to get to 3.5 because it's not really a realistic ask.
Well, it's up to the Prime Minister to round the table. The decision will be taken by consensus, unanimously. So he'll have his voice to play. Other people will do that as well. And we'll see whether 3.5% becomes the target and whether SACEUR believes that that is absolutely essential. That is the way that the thing is actually determined. But what we're promising here is 2.5% the year after next and 3% at the beginning of the next Parliament. The benchmark for the review was 3% by 2035. The Prime Minister has promised we'll get there. The commitment was there. The Defence Secretary made the plain last night that the review will be financed, and that's good for me.
Do you think that we'd even be talking about it in this way if it wasn't for Donald Trump?
I think Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin put an accelerator onto defence expenditure and defence capabilities in Europe. There's no doubt about that. But the Europeans, I think, the non-US allies, including Canada, woke up to the fact that what happened in Ukraine meant if they were going to keep their people safe, they clearly had to do more in their own interest. So it's a question about satisfying Donald Trump, being alert to what Vladimir Putin is doing, but also a recognition that defence is the ultimate insurance policy. And you've got to pay a premium for your insurance. Now, maybe that involves persuading the people, that they need to spend more on defence, or else the consequences could be grave. So in our review, we say, and the government has accepted, to have a national conversation with the people of this country to say, if you want to be safe, if you want your kids and their kids to be safe, the insurance premium has to be paid just like your premium on your home insurance.
You say that about wanting to be safe. It feels like it can feel like we are quite safe here, that Russia is an awfully long way away. Ukraine, Poland, that spends a lot of money on defence, these are all countries that are far closer to Russia. Is this just, the same old military bosses banging the drum for more money?
But it's not true. There were people in Mariupol and Bucha and Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine. And I remember I used to visit these places, you know, who walked in the streets as safely as we can walk away from the studio tonight, who felt safe and felt fine. And then suddenly the invasion took place, and they're being brutally suppressed and oppressed by the Russian Federation today. So that's one side of the coin, you know, that there is a potential for that to take place, even if you think you're secure. The other side of the coin is that we're under attack at the moment. You have 90,000 cyber attacks every day. You know, 97% of the data that we use, that will be used for this television programme, comes in undersea cables. You know, something like 77% of our gas supplies for this country, i.e. keeps the lights and the heating on, comes in one pipeline from Norway. So we've seen what happened in Spain and Portugal when the lights went out. We saw what happened to Heathrow Airport when one of its transformers blew up. We're seeing what happens in the Baltic Sea when these alleged merchant ships drag their anchors across the cables. So the war is already on, but the next war is going to be very, very big and nasty.
It's a question, as you say, about what we're spending the money on, but it is also a question of money as well. And Rachel Reeves is looking ahead to a very difficult settlement on things like prisons that are full, on things like hospitals, schools, councils that are struggling. Do you feel sorry for her?
Yeah, it's a grim job being Chancellor, you know, and, you know, I spoke to her a couple of weeks ago. I was actually moaning to her about holding up my review.
What did you say to her?
I said, why are you holding up my review?
What did she say?
And she said, we're not holding up your review. We just want to get it right, you know, so fine, you know. And you know, and
did she put pressure on you?
She's a good person. Yeah, you know, she wanted, you know, the ends tidied up. Fine. That's the process of government as well. And we've got the report out now.
What does that mean, the ends tidied up?
Well, I think there were some detail. There's a sort of, what about if this happens? What about if that happens? What will it cost? You know, so making sure that we were within it. So the Prime Minister yesterday and the Defence Secretary last night made it clear that the money will be provided to execute the 62 recommendations that are in the report, all of which have been accepted by the government. But I don't envy the task that Rachel Reeves has got. You know, this is really difficult. But I think she's got in her mind the very fact that people need to be protected, need to be safe.
Do you think we should do what, you know, Germany's done and have this surge in borrowing in order to rearm ourselves to meet the need?
Well, I'm deliberately not, after the review's been published, wandering into the territory of what to do. The country itself has got to make a decision about how safe it wants to be and how secure it has to be. And that may mean that within the budget as a whole, there will have to be prioritisation or reprioritisation in order to get there. Now, that may mean eventually more taxes or specific taxes, as there is in Germany. That's a decision that will be taken by the Prime Minister and by the Chancellor. But, you know, we need to build a consensus in the country that defence matters, that it's urgent, and that if you want to be protected, you have to pay that insurance premium that is the defence budget.
Just finally, you have spent an awful lot of months kind of agonising over this. It must be quite a responsibility, right, if you know how important this is. What do you want people to take from the review that you've co-authored?
Well, the report is about how we reorganise defence, transform defence, a new National Armaments Director, new procurement processes, grabbing the best of technology, the most innovative technology, learning the lessons of Ukraine, you know, and seeing how, you know, the Ministry of Defence can be reorganised so that every pound that is spent on defence is actually spent on defending the country. So that's what we did. You know, we've spent 10 months looking at everything in enormous detail, every aspect of defence, scrubbed and researched and consulted on. So this report is, you know, is a template. I hope other countries are going to read it and are going to like it and may well adopt the recommendations that are there. So if at the end of the day we've persuaded people that more needs to be done to make the country safe, then we'll have succeeded.
Well, coverage of defence spending is likely to feature in tomorrow's papers, of course. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the broadcaster and journalist Sonia Sadler. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? Joe Grady, who's the General Secretary of the University and College Union, and the Reform UK MP, newest Reform UK MP, Sarah Pochin. Great to have you both with us. So let's crack off on defence spending, shall we? It feels like this is a kind of new big dilemma for the government. Everything has changed in the world. We're in a much more dangerous situation, they say. But, of course, we've got to find a way of paying for it if we do want to go ahead. Sarah, what's your position on this? How much should the government be spending?
Well, the point is that the British people expect that their government, any people expect that their government has got their best interests at heart and that they can defend them. And it's quite clear that 14 years of Tories and a short period of the Labour government, neither of those governments have prepared us for where we now find ourselves on the global arena. And as you've just said, things have changed. We have enjoyed, years really in Europe, certainly of peace. And that's been destroyed now with what's happened in Ukraine. And I think we're suddenly waking up to that way too late. Let's face it, we can't defend ourselves if we had to defend ourselves today. And I think we're in a precarious situation. And the British people deserve, better than that. How have we got to the situation we've been in, that we find ourselves in?
Jo, I'm interested in your take on this because, we've got the spending review in a couple of weeks and, universities, adult education, stuff like that could end up being squeezed in order to help make the priority that the government has in defence spending. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, you described it as a dilemma and I agree, but I don't think it's a dilemma that the public would share. I think that in terms of the public, they would be wanting good negotiations, not nuclear bombs. They would be wanting to see leaders engage in dialogue to deliver better solutions. And I don't really see how arming ourselves in a better way will provide peace or security. And as you say, this is all within the backdrop of a spending review where if you look at any opinion polls, people are saying we want to know about the NHS. We want to know about taxes. We want to know about whether or not we're going to get GP appointments. We want to know about what the government's going to do to address the cost of living. There are all transport. We've got one of the most expensive and yet unreliable transport systems. The government says that it has big ambitions that it wants to deliver for the economy, but we've seen, as you say, a cut to adult education. We haven't seen sufficient investment in FE or higher education. So I really think that we need, a root and branch review in the UK about how we're going to address the mismanagement and the dismantlement of our infrastructures. I just don't see how spending this money is going to deliver better security.
If I could come back on that, at the end of the day, I think the situation globally now is critical. We've got Iran as a massive threat. We've got Russia as a massive threat. We've got China as a massive threat. These cannot be ignored. And everything you're talking about, I agree, is important. But at the end of the day, if we're at war, if we're under threat like that, then all of that pales into insignificance. Because who would have believed that we have war in Europe now, in this day and age, and what's going on in Ukraine? This is the reality. We have to be able to defend ourselves. And if you look at the principal purpose of government, it's to defend their people. So I agree with all those things being important, but it's irrelevant if we're at war and we can't defend ourselves.
I don't think the major role of government is to defend people. I think the major role of government is to make sure that we use the resources of the country that we have to improve people's lives. That might in any one moment mean defending people. It might mean other things. But my personal belief, and I think this is if you were to walk out on the streets of London now and ask people, spending 3.5% of our GDP when we have, incredibly high rates of homelessness, we have an education service that isn't really fit for purpose. We have children skipping meals. We have incredibly high levels of poverty. I genuinely don't see how increasing this expenditure, when we think about modern warfare, would keep us more safe. And I genuinely just don't think it's where people are at.
Well, I clearly disagree with that completely for the reasons I've said. But the important thing is, how is this government going to pay for it?
Yeah, what would you do? Would you do cuts? Would you raise taxes? Would you increase borrowing?
What we really need to be doing, and what this government's getting so wrong, is this government is not supporting a strong economy. It's taxing in the wrong ways. You know, it's taxing the very wealthy. We've seen millionaires leave this country in their millions, taking their billions with them.
So you'd cut taxes to pay for more defence spending?
No, the point is that we have to grow a healthy economy. That brings with it the money to pay for defence, and that's not what this Labour government is doing.
I think it's been a really, really interesting debate that we could continue for a long time. I feel like we've got the perfect articulation of both sides of this debate, so thank you both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. As the Home Office tries to blame it on the weatherman when it comes to small boat crossings, we'll look at whether their claims are a load of hot air.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the number of so-called good weather days for migrants crossing the Channel so far in 2025 have more than doubled compared with previous years. That's according to the latest Home Office figures. And the government's been suggesting that this has contributed to a record number of arrivals. But exclusive research by Sky News has shown that this is not quite the whole story. Ali Forsky is here to explain. Ali, what's going on?
So, just to give you a bit of context, you know, we hear the word record when it comes to small boat crossings quite a lot, but this so far is a record year, more than 13,600 people so far this year crossing the Channel in small boats. It's significantly more than last year and previous years, including 2022, when you will remember we saw more than 40,000 people crossing the Channel. It's a really high number that year. So we use the word record a lot. This is a big year in terms of those numbers, and this is a government that said they were going to smash the gangs, bring the numbers down. What we are seeing today is, for the very first time, they've released some new figures, and it's all about weather and conditions. And in fact, I think we can show you, hopefully, in this screen, some of that data. Here we go. I'm actually going to get up. So 60, this is a number of red days. So red days is basically how the Home Office calculate what is a day when weather conditions are basically better, which means more people are likely to cross the channel. 60 red days in the first 4 months of 2025. Look at that compared to previous years. I mean, it's more than double last year, 23, 27. It is a lot more. So they have got a point there that, yes, the weather has been a factor here. But we, as you said, have been doing our own kind of data analysis. And if we show you the next graph, this is what we have found. To an extent, it does echo the Home Office data. I should say, you know, our methodology obviously is slightly different, but our data does show that this is green here, what we've called sailing viability, good weather days, effectively, double the number the previous year. But what is interesting is the blue bit here, because these are low viability days, days where the weather is less good, people less likely to cross the channel. And the most interesting thing is the next chart, which shows you, I should say that chart was January to May. Here you go, look at this blue line. So this is low viability days, days where the weather is less good, more and more people are crossing the channel in small boats on those low viability days. 30% more this year than the same period last year, double for the same period in 2023. Why is that happening? Well, we've been talking to a man called Peter Walsh from the Migration Observatory.
They've become more professionalised, better resourced, they've always been highly adaptable, and the big challenges are the senior figures operate in jurisdictions far beyond our control. The lower level individuals, they can be quickly replaced, which is why it's been described as being like whack-a-mole. So these are real operational challenges that the government faces.
Well, Ali's joined our little kind of family table to discuss this story. So hot weather, yes, that is a factor, but it's not the only factor, basically.
No, and what I should also say is we're really seeing smuggler tactics changing. You heard him mention it there. The average number of people on a small boat this year was about 56. In 2018, that number was 7. And year on year, we have seen more and more people, so more and more overcrowded boats. The Home Office say they're tackling this at source. They've also given us some pictures, and I think this is the first time they're being seen. Here you go. These are a whole series of raids that happened this morning up and down the country in Cheltenham, Nottingham, Manchester. 6 people have been arrested. And they are accused of being involved in smuggling gangs, of helping more than 200 Botswanan nationals enter the UK over 2 years. So government's saying, look, they're cracking down, but they're saying you've got to bear with us, basically.
Really interesting debate to be having. I'm interested to get your perspective, of course, as well. But Jo, to you first. What's your kind of reaction to what we've been talking about?
I think in general, and I preface this not from you just then, I am quite concerned that there is a general lack of humanity in discussions when we talk about migrants, both here in the UK and elsewhere. And I think one thing I want to say is that I think see politicians and the media frequently kind of singling out migrants as a group to kind of scapegoat for broader political issues. We have a low-wage economy in the UK and it's completely propped up by migrants. We have huge problems in recruiting enough people in the NHS. And I want to say more than that, migrants are not just statistics. They're our neighbours, they're our colleagues. And I think that we have to be really careful with the sort of the migration debates that we have to not lose sight of that.
Yeah, there's an awful lot that I think everyone would agree with in what you say, particularly about not losing sight that these are people, these are kids, these are families, these are people who are trying to better their lives and taking risks. Do you have a problem with the number of people who are crossing illegally? Because it's going up, isn't it, right?
Yeah, and I think we need a really serious conversation. When we see polls in the UK, opinion polls, we know that the general public want to see immigration discussed. What I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't do that in a dehumanising way. We need safe legal routes for people to come here. That's not impossible. We've done it before. All it needs is some leadership and compassion. Most of us, I would imagine, I know at least me, I have a migrant story in my family. So, I think that there is an important discussion to be had, but I don't think the general rhetoric in the UK is allowing that conversation to happen.
Sarah, I want to go to you because what I find quite interesting about this debate is the kind of, the politics of it. We've seen the Conservatives really try and toughen their position on migration, partly to deal with the threat of reform. And it feels to me, like, I don't know what you think, Ali, we're seeing Labour trying to do the same now, talking about the weather, this is why we're seeing the records, releasing the pictures of them, being tough on migrants. What do you make of the sort of tactics of it?
Look, this is the biggest issue facing this country at the moment. It is the biggest issue that's upsetting the people that live here in this country as British citizens, whether they've come in legally as legal migrants or they're British citizens. But the point is, this government's doing nothing about tackling it. What we've just seen here, what are they talking about? The weather, for goodness sake. These aren't small boats anymore. They are carrying, as you said, 57, 60 people on that's not a small boat anymore. We're still referring to them as small boats. Well, we need to get real on this. This is a proper commercial exercise. And that short clip you showed there of the government clamping down on, I don't know, however many it was in charge of bringing in 200. 200? Saturday, we saw 1,200 come in. So this is an absolute national emergency now because it's going to bankrupt this country. And it's not about being humanitarian. These are not families. These are young, economic migrants, fighting-age males that are coming into this country. And I know from my constituency, they're living in houses of multiple occupancy. They're being lost to the system and they are a threat to our society.
Can I ask, because I think this is really important, actually, now that reform are, you want to be taken seriously, you're riding behind the polls. What are you planning to do policy-wise? Because I feel like you're very, very good at outlining what you see as the issue, but what would you do?
We've said exactly what we'll do. So, and by the way, the Conservative government and the Labour government could have done it. So what we'll do is every illegal immigrant that arrives in this country illegally, and I stress that word, will be taken to a deportation centre off this country, off-site, and processed and sent back to where they came from.
That's not legal, is it? That's a problem.
Well, it will be with reform in charge because we will come out of the European Court of Human Rights.
But you need
the European Convention.
You need the returns agreement with these countries, don't you? And that's the whole problem, isn't it?
It's not a problem. At the end of the day, we come out of the European Convention of Human Rights, which no other government will do. That gives us legally the position to send these people home. We take them back and we fly them back and we take them back to where they came from. We have to get firm on this. And not only that, as soon as you start clamping down on this, which these governments do...
It's not just the ECHR, though, is it? Because you're talking about countries all around the world, right? But you're talking about, this is what I'm struggling
that's
with.
the whole point. Governments could do it. Look, and all you have to do is start doing this because look what Denmark's achieved. Look what the Scandinavian countries have achieved. They have stopped this influx of illegal immigrants. No one's commenting on legal immigrants or people that actually are genuine refugees. These are not genuine refugees. These are people that are coming into this country because they know they will get a house, they will get a phone, they will get clothes, they will get benefits, and that's why they're coming here. Otherwise, they'd wait in France. But look what we've seen this weekend again, the French waving them off happily, taking pictures, go off you go to England, because we don't want you here. And we're paying France for that.
Yeah, because I think this is part of the, non-fact-checked, relentless dehumanisation of migrants. There is a reality that, because we've seen it when people are asked that they are worried about immigration, but there is also a reality where the cost of living crisis has gone on for years, where there is a scarcity of housing because we haven't seen any investment in it, where there is an underfunding of the NHS because it's been cut to the bone, where you are charged extortionate rents from your landlords, where your gas bills are higher. So there is a genuine feeling of life getting materially worse for people. That is real. And my real concern is that we are seeing the scapegoating of migrants with really, emotive rhetoric that you've just used. And it's really letting the political class off the hook. They're offering no real solutions. We've been failed by our politicians who haven't got the decency to say what they've got wrong. They're just pointing the finger and, opting out of various laws that are there for a reason in order to kind of shuffle people around the globe is not a solution.
No, I know both of you have got an awful lot more, again, to say about this, but we are out of time. I hope you feel like you've kind of both managed to have some space to get your points across on that. Thank you both very much, and thank you, Ali, as well. You're watching The Politics Hub, coming up. Will it be this summer's biggest transfer? The government threatens legal action against Roman Abramovich, with more than £2 billion still owed for Ukrainian aid over the sale of Chelsea Football Club. Welcome back. Now, the government is threatening to sue the former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich in a dispute over what to do with the £2.5 billion raised through the sale of the club. Now, that money was meant to be given to a charitable foundation to be used to help humanitarian causes in Ukraine. But instead, it remains frozen in a UK bank account after the Russian oligarch was sanctioned and forced to sell Chelsea because of his alleged links to the Putin regime, which, of course, I should say, he denies. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris joins us now from the newsroom. Rob, what more can you tell us?
Well, this is part of a broad discussion, really, about freeing up those frozen Russian assets over sanctioned individuals. And this is perhaps one of the most high-profile instances, the sale of Chelsea being enforced by then Conservative government in March 2022 after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Eventually, the sale went through for £2.5 billion in May, but almost 3 years on, that money does remain frozen because there is a dispute over where the money should go. Abramovich himself believed it should go to all victims of the war. The government, both the Conservatives then, now Labour, believe it should go to help only humanitarian causes in Ukraine. So effectively, so it wouldn't benefit anyone in Russia as the instigators of the war. Now, this is an ongoing impasse. It needs the approval of Abramovich to ensure that licence can be granted from the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation to ensure the release of this funding. But the government is now ratcheting up the rhetoric with this statement from Rachel Reeves, Chancellor, and Foreign Secretary David Lammy, threatening this legal action to go to court to force Abramovich to agree for this cash to be released. As for the oligarch himself, well, not much has been heard from him over the last 3 years. He was seen at some of the early attempted peace talks, but he's kept a silence, not condemning the war, not supporting the war. Perhaps there is risk and consequence of doing so, but certainly the government waiting to get an answer from Abramovich so this cash can be released to help those most in need in Ukraine.
Rob, thank you very much indeed. Rob Harris speaking to us there. Right, let's bring in Joe and Sarah again, shall we? I guess this is just an illustration of the difficulty sometimes of extracting cash for Ukraine or for imposing sanctions. What do you think?
Well, I think Abramovich is just, messing around now, playing a game. At the end of the day, take him to court. Let's take him to court. Let's get that money. The money should be going to rebuild Ukraine and to help the people, the Ukrainians that have suffered at the hands of the Russians. So he's playing a game.
I'm not, I promise, just talking about football because you are a Sheffield Wednesday fan like me. It doesn't happen very often. It really doesn't happen very often. There are not that many of us around, so particularly in Westminster. But, sport is political as well, right?
Yeah, sport's really political. And, I think on Russian money, this government's probably a little bit late to the party. We could jump in a cab, drive to Mayfair, you would see hundreds of empty houses owned by either Russian billionaires or billionaires from elsewhere around the globe. The UK is a bit of a safe haven for rich people to invest, to buy property. And I think, why stop at Abramovich? This begs the question, why not a wealth tax? But, yeah, take him to court. I think this is theatre from the government, to be honest. If they're serious, take him to court.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Interesting chat. Coming up, is the utility giant Thames Water closer to being renationalised tonight after its preferred investor to inject much-needed cash into the business pulled out of the plans? The US equity firm KKR had been selected to enter the next stage of the process and invest more than £3 billion, but it now says it's no longer in a position to proceed. Well, our business and economics correspondent Paul Calso reports.
Thames Water is once more in danger of sinking after American investors KKR abandoned plans for a £4 billion equity stake to keep afloat a company already loaded with almost £20 billion in debt that's failed to prevent sewage pollution, to the fury of campaigners.
We need to remove polluting for profit, and we need to remove the monopolistic financial engineering, exploitive behaviour of these companies. I think that with KKR pulling out of the Thames Water deal this morning, that now forces the issue, and in reality, government should put Thames Water into special administration, and it should do so today.
Thames's latest crisis coincides with a plan to clean up the financial and environmental mess of our privatised water system. An independent review by a former Bank of England Deputy Governor who sees deep-rooted failures and no simple solution.
I think we need a number of changes. We need more effective regulation. We need to get investors into the industry who are there for the long term. We need to devolve some of these really complicated, expensive planning processes down to local government and local communities who live by the water. And finally, the government does need to give a much stronger steer about what its priorities are.
The challenge for any plan is that UK water companies are no longer seen as a safe long-term bet for investors. Amid political and public pressure, they're demanding higher returns, and that means higher bills.
Investability is really important. We need something like £13 billion from shareholders over the next couple of years to support an unprecedented level of investment in the infrastructure, over £100 billion. The shareholders need to put that money in to finance the many projects that are now coming forward.
With its preferred bidder KKR having walked away, Thames Water will now turn to its creditors for an alternative bailout that could see billions of pounds of debt swapped for an equity stake in the company. If that fails, nationalisation may be the last and only option. Thames Water hope a deal can be done later this summer. If not, the company and the promise of privatisation could be sunk. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Still to come on the Politics Hub. Whoever said politics was a popularity contest was absolutely right. So who in the current cabinet is appealing to the cabinet and to the public, and who have Labour voters lost their faith in?
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, we'll have the latest as police in Portugal begin a fresh search for Madeleine McCann nearly 20 years after she disappeared. Why Thames Water has that sinking feeling again as hopes for backing from a major investor dry up, and how day trippers had a whale of a time during a close encounter with orcas off the Northumberland coast. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, it's hard for a government minister to maintain any level of popularity, even more so when there's an acute cash shortage as well. But the latest polling from YouGov shines a fascinating light on which of Keir Starmer's cabinet is doing better with the general public and with Labour voters. So I just wanted to take a look at a few with you. So John Healey, the Defence Secretary, is the most popular cabinet member among the wider public, although he does fall to 8th, I should say, among Labour voters. Always goes very well, standing in front of, tanks and so on as well. It's an opposite story, though, for Angela Rayner. She's the most popular among her party's voters, but she's third from bottom with the rest of the public. So a bit of a split there between Labour voters and everyone else. The PM, though, is still surprisingly popular with Labour voters, but he does go from second top to second bottom when it comes to the general public. Probably a surprise to absolutely nobody as well. That the least popular member is the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. She's the 11th most unpopular member of Cabinet among the public and also among Labour voters as well. Let's chat, shall we, to Jo and Sarah a little bit more about this. I mean, look, in a way, it's not fair, is it, right? If you're a Chancellor and you've got to tell everyone that actually, you're not allowed all these nice things and you've got to pay some taxes to deal with them, it's no wonder that she's least popular. What do you reckon?
I think that there's a bigger issue, if I might say, which is that we are living in an age of populism. And I think, whether...
So you're saying that this is all... We shouldn't be doing this?
No. I'm going to get to that. But I think, you've got Trump in America, you've got Farage here, people who can hold a tune at a rostrum, who can deliver a soundbite, irrelevant whether or not what they're saying is true or false. And I think the public are kind of vibing with that right now. So I think there is an issue that the government doesn't have any standout communicators and they need to think about who they're putting in front of the electorate. With that said, you can't connect with people if what you're communicating to them is stuff they don't want to hear. And Labour have scored some horrific own goals. You know, the winter fuel allowance, not supporting the WASPy women, the two-child benefit cap, and many, many other things. So, you know, if Starmer was delivering, I don't think people would care what he sounded like. But Labour either have to deliver good policies or communicate it better, and at the moment, they're not doing either.
I guess if you look at the individual cabinet rankings as well, though, right, you know, John Healey, Defence Secretary, most popular because he gets to go to Ukraine and he gets to stand in front of a load of tanks and he gets to talk about how important, you know, defending the country is. Least popular, no surprise, it's the Chancellor who tells everyone how much taxes they're going to pay. I mean, like, who'd be a politician, right? You must be, like, wondering.
I'm 4 weeks in. But, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Rachel Reeves, I think in the eyes of the public, they've lost confidence in her because, you know, they came in, they said they were going to increase public spending by 10 billion. Now they've increased it by 60 billion. No one knows how they're going to pay for it. Then they spent another 30 billion on the Chagos. You know, so in terms of Rachel Reeves, I think she's just lost confidence. And of course, there's, you know, the silliness of her CV. And as you know, my colleague calls her Rachel from accounts. Things like that stick. And politics is, you know, is a silly game like that. But at the end of the day, I just think the public's lost confidence in her. But I do agree with you, Joe, in that the message has been a disaster for Labour so far. They've cut. And I know from the very recent by-election that core Labour voters have completely fallen out of love with Labour.
We haven't got loads of time left on the programme, but who do you think is doing well? If you were going to choose, you know, your kind of top performer, you know, if you were voting here, who would you put as your number one top performer from the current cabinet? Don't laugh.
That says it all.
I mean, for what it's worth, I think Angela Rayner is a great communicator and, as always, I think communicated really effectively. I think she has been the victim of quite a lot of misogyny and classism. But the point I am making is even the best communicators from Labour cannot communicate what is terrible policy.
No, I get the wider message. But Angela Rayner, we've got to vote for Angela Rayner here. Who do you vote for?
None of them. I'm sorry.
I'm not having that.
They haven't got any business experience between them.
I'm not having that. Come
Absolutely
on. I'm putting you on the spot.
Do you know what? Who would you choose?
Well, I'm asking you to choose someone.
If Keir Starmer went tomorrow, there is no one to replace him. He's a disaster, but there's no one to replace him.
So who do you think is the best communicator?
I really struggle because, you know, I can't choose one.
There's an issue, I think. You know, we see a lot of these politicians behind the scenes, and I think they're much more charismatic in person, and the authenticity is being lost in politics.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's been great to have you both on the programme. Thank you very much indeed. That is it from us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it's UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then, of course, at 9 p.m, you've got The World with Yalda Hakeem as well. But thanks for joining us. That's it for tonight. I'll see you tomorrow. A very big week of news for defence. Perhaps something different tomorrow night.